They'll be sending us seats.
Okay, guys. Let's have your attention. Our next speaker today is Ingrid Lind-Jahn, level 3 from Wisconsin. She was a level 4 for a while before stepping down to keep her husband Peter under control. She was head judge at Grand Prix Washington a couple of years ago, which was the first American Grand Prix to go over 2,000 players. And apparently there's a big Grand Prix this summer, but who cares about that? The Grand Prix Washington was an important one. So let me present to you and give it up for Ingrid Lind-Jahn, please.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me in back there? Alrighty then. Thank you, Mr. Smarty Pants. Not to be confused with the subject of our talk today, Cheaty McCheatypants. This cheating guy, what kind of cheating is he going to do? How are we going to catch him? What do we do if we catch him? And why the heck does he keep coming to my events? So first of all, what we need to start out with is, what is cheating? And here, you might not be able to read this in the back of the room, but I assure you this is in the IPG, and I will actually read this one because this is important. It's the definition of cheating in Magic. A person breaks a rule defined by the tournament documents, lies to a tournament official, or notices an offense committed in his or her or a teammate's match and does not call attention to it. But that's not all. There are 2 other criteria. The player must be attempting to gain advantage from his or her action, and the player must be aware that he or she is doing something illegal. If all the criteria are not met, the offense is not cheating. It should be handled by a different infraction. And it goes on to talk about how this looks like a gameplay error, tournament error. And that's true. An awful lot of cheating infractions start out looking a lot like a game rule violation. Let's break this down a little bit. Breaking a rule defined by the documents. That includes the comp rules, the IPG, the MTR. There's a lot of places. We know where all these things are, but players don't always know them. But that's why we've got a lot of these documents. That's why it's important to occasionally look through what the MTR says. It's got things about there, the communication policy, shortcut policy, just how tournaments are supposed to be run. Lying to a judge. That's pretty clear. You know, they say something and you're pretty certain that it is a not true statement. Now we'll talk a little bit about investigations today. This isn't all just about investigations. That's a whole topic in and of itself. And while I'm sure you would love to hear me talk at length for like several hours, it would get kind of tiring. We'd want lunch eventually. Realize when you talk to players over and over again, it's human nature. As you repeat a story, it's going to come out a little differently every time. So just because some word has changed, you don't need to jump on it. That's not necessarily lying. That's just, that's the way it comes through this time. Lies tend to be, either a lot of new added information or a complete shift, or what the player told the first judge is entirely different from what they tell you. That's a big discrepancy there. And the big one here is the noticing an offense and not saying anything. It's kind of hiding an infraction. It's a kind of cheating by not actively doing something. It's by kind of omitting to do something you're supposed to. Watch out for those. But the big things are the must be attempting to gain advantage. And that's, players make mistakes all the time in this game. Players, when they're playing, don't always realize they're making mistakes. If you watch a lot of Magic, even if you watch like the coverage, you'll see people making mistakes and you'll see things, oh my God, why did he do that? It's just in the moment, they're on another train of thought. And there has to be some kind of plausible advantage for it. Now when you see the armchair judging discussions, they will go through these convoluted loops as to how any little thing that somebody does wrong could potentially provide them some kind of advantage. It's got to be kind of plausible within the game to be realistic. You're thinking enough in the game that you aren't working out this complex system. And the other thing, they must be aware that they're doing something illegal. And this you also get by talking to the players and interviewing them. You can kind of tell if somebody's clueless and like, what? That's not something that I could do? Or you use your player knowledge. Somebody that you know has been going to every Pro Tour qualifier in a 5-state area for the last 6 years, has probably heard about more things than kid who's like, this is my first PTQ, I just want to see what's going on here. I played pre-releases, they're pretty fun. So,
That was good acting.
but the other thing to remember is not only do a lot of gameplay errors look like cheating, but sometimes a gameplay error ends up being just a gameplay error. But the big thing here, why is this important? What's the penalty for cheating? It's a big fat DQ. So, one of the things I said I was going to talk about is kind of premeditated versus opportunistic. Which guy is the most likely cheater? Good old Snidely Whiplash there with his Evil Master Plan coming to your event? Or Joe Clueless who kind of comes bopping in? Well, it depends. The guy on the left there is more likely to do something premeditated. He's got a Grandmaster Plan. He's got something he's going to try and do. The other guy, he might show up, has no intention of cheating. An opportunity presents itself, and he takes advantage of it. We'll be talking about that a little later. So there is some premeditated cheating in Magic. We like to think of their cheaters as they're doing that, but it just says, my foolproof plan to win the PTQ, and it shows a Rube Goldberg device there, for those of you in back. We all know, or suspect, Magic has got a lot more to it than that. You're not just going to be able to come in with a deck and a system that's going to auto-win. You're playing against another player, it's an interactive game. You can't just build a deck that consists of nothing but the winning hand for your deck because you're going to run into too many copies of cards. We'll catch that. But there is some premeditated cheating in the game. And some of the kind of things to watch out for that we see as premeditated are people bringing cards to add to a sealed deck. That can range from, hey, in my last sealed pool, this card was really good, and I'm just going to drop it into my next pre-release pool because it was just such a great card. Or, I'm sitting next to my buddy here at the pre-release, and he's got some good cards, and I've got some good cards, and we're going to trade beforehand. That's okay, right? That's not quite so premeditated, but it's thinking ahead of time. Some really creative players might bring a whole sealed pool to a sealed deck tournament. We have done something, I don't know if you ever heard about it, called trapped deck lists, where the deck lists that we provide for the sealed pool have got some deliberate things added to them, so that when the players are filling out their deck list, and if we are looking for something like this, we double check that to make sure they are filling out one of the deck lists we provided. An example of this at a side event for a GP, I think it was, they managed to catch the players who were bringing in their sealed pool from somewhere else because they brought in the cards in a different language. You would be amazed. You would be amazed.
Brilliant!
So just because somebody has a Grandmaster Plan doesn't necessarily mean they thought it all the way through. Also into the premeditated, and this is something I can't personally get into a lot of detail about, would be, say, somebody who is really skilled at card shuffling techniques and can peek at cards and, keep a card up near the top of his deck that he wants, or, move an opponent's card to the bottom. That's premeditated because it requires some skill in order to be able to do that. Even if I knew, and a lot of practice, you got to practice that one at home before you bring it to an event. But there's a lot of different ways of doing that, and the other problem with that is you're not going to do that every single time you're shuffling the deck, because the opportunity isn't always going to present itself. And if you're doing that much funny shuffling, each time you're doing it, it increases the odds of getting caught. But that's something we consider premeditated. If any of you are like an amateur magician and knows some card shuffling things, these are the guys who can watch and might be able to spot some sneaky shuffles going on out there. I think I had a question. It's something we certainly would prefer that players do not do, but I do not recall a specific citation in the documents that say you aren't allowed to talk with people about what you're going to draft. If we're looking at this as a problem, it also probably falls more under collusion than cheating. It's not so much colluding for prizes, but they're colluding for potential results in this. The other kind of cheating that's sort of in between premeditated and opportunistic are things that are clearly cheating. They're a little impulsive, but they're pretty obvious. They're not something that you could mistake easily for a gameplay error or something. Altering result slips. I had to DQ a young gentleman one time when he brought up a result slip with the results crossed out, written in a different handwriting, and when I was entering the result slip a little later, I went back and talked to him and said, well, what were the results of your match? Who won? And he said, well, my opponent won. That's not how the result slip was filled out. I talked to the opponent, and the opponent had won. And I said, well, can you explain to me why it shows the reverse here? It looks like somebody's changed it. Somebody with a different colored pen whose number 2s happen to look exactly like the way that kid wrote his DCI number, but I didn't need to say it at the point. He says, oh, the judge must have done that. Good one. But the other thing that can happen with result slips is, the result slips are supposed to stand. Players might decide after the fact that they actually want them changed. This is part of the reason we're very loath to change result slips. That's why we have players sign them, why it's their responsibility to bring up the right result slip. We are not happy with players taking matters into their own hands and administering vigilante justice. This doesn't mean necessarily launching themselves over the table. That's a different DQ offense. But this is the guy who sees his opponent sort out his deck between lands and spells, and then do this very careful little 3-pile shuffle and not do very many riffle shuffles, and says, okay, I know what to do. I'm not going to call a judge. I'm going to 3-pile shuffle his deck and unsort it for him. That's what we don't want players doing that. That is cheating if you take matters into your own hands to try to screw your opponent worse over than you thought you were getting screwed in the first place. That's a bad slippery slope. I mean, it's just begging for, I don't trust that guy. I think he drew an extra card, so I'm going to get to draw an extra card to even it up. We don't want that kind of stuff introduced into the game. And the other thing is, just because a player thinks his opponent might be cheating and then decides to do something like this on him, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were cheating. Have you ever played a game against a really annoying kid who talks constantly and is making comments about all your play, and he's playing a terrible deck, and you can't for the life of you get your deck to do anything, and he just has these stupid god draws and ends up killing you? And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, oh my God, what a cheater, even though he's just an obnoxious jerk who was really lucky. But in the back of your mind, there might be this thread of, oh my God, he's such a cheater. And we don't want people just cheating back, because sometimes it is just the kid who's really lucky and he isn't actually cheating. That's why we're there. That's why we're trying to puzzle it out. So opportunistic cheating is when the opportunity presents itself and it just seems like a really good idea. And these are the things that players, they come up with the idea at the time and mentally very often can kind of justify it. And I'll get into that, because that's why this gets so insidious. But opportunistic cheating, this is like draft peeking, not just actively moving your chair back and tipping your hat, but sometimes you're sitting next to somebody who's just helpfully showing you his cards the whole time. I mean, who's to blame you? That's opportunistic. The opponent writes down the wrong life total as you're going through combat, and you don't correct it. It happens to be favorable to you. There's the gaining advantage part of it. And you justify, I'm saying you, because we want to kind of get into the mind of what is going on in a cheater's mind that helps us when we're trying to tease it all out at the end. and you don't correct it. Now, well, you know, maybe I missed something, and he's the one who got it right. It's his life total, right? The opponent puts a creature that isn't dead yet into the graveyard. You know, the rule says it's not dead, it should stay in play. You don't just go willy-nilly dropping creatures wherever you want. And hiding fractions is also cheating. You draw your opening hand, realize you didn't de-sideboard, you don't call a judge. You got a couple cards that stick together. You think, well, I don't need to call a judge. I mean, he might give me a penalty or something like that. So I'll just wait until sometime when my opponent isn't paying attention and not draw the next card, and it'll all be okay. No. You've realized you've done something wrong. You've realized you've done something wrong. And now you're doing some improper action that you might be thinking it makes things all better, but it's not an appropriate action. So the difference between cheating and a game rule violation sometimes comes down to what you find out at the investigation. Now, most of the game rule violations that we see are just game rule violations. But every now and then there's going to be one where you or your floor judge takes a look at it and you're like, well, that seems a little weird. Or, somebody told me about that same thing happening earlier today. I think it was the same guy. Or, you know, gosh, that's kind of a lot of cards. I mean, you just get this feeling. I mean, you've all played Magic and you know all kinds of weird game rule violations can happen. But sometimes you just get a feeling that one's a little weird, and that's when you want to talk to the players a little more. Whenever you do an investigation, consider the rest of your event. You know, is it you're the only judge, you're handling everything? Have you got someone else helping you out? Is it 3 minutes before the end of the next round? Is it just at the start of the next round? An investigation can take a little time. So have a brief, kind of strategy for your backup plan for like getting the round ended or something like that. You want to keep the rest of the event in mind. You find the wackiest things on the internet. I did not make this up. It's the Spanish Inquisition, and it's it's just basically the best thing on it is that the flavor text is nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Investigating at first might sound like it's difficult. It sounds like it's scary. Oh my God. But it is not an Inquisition. We're just trying to talk to the players to get a little more information. And ideally, you'd like to try to be as brief with it as possible. Investigating something more and more and more doesn't always make it better. Just a 15-minute investigation is pretty big. 45 minutes, you're not going to get much more than you would in even 5 or 10. Relax and try to be calm. I know the first one you do, your heart's going to be thumping like this, and you're like, oh my God, what if I have to DQ them? What's going to happen to me? What if I get it wrong? They're going to kick me out of the DCI and I'll never get to judge again, ever. No. It just feels like that. You get over that. Take some time to talk to the player, and if you can, try and start out with just get a baseline from them, especially if he's somebody you don't know. If he's somebody you know, you approach it a little differently, but, what's your name? Where are you from? How's your deck doing today? How long have you been playing? You like playing tournaments? What kind of stuff do you do? And then you want to get his idea of the story, and what you're communicating to him is, I'm not sure what happened here. I'm just trying to figure it all out and get things straightened out. And of course, no matter whether he's guilty or innocent, one of the first responses that you might kind of get is, I don't know, or not me, or just a kind of shrug or something like that. That's why you talk to the players a little more. So you want to get the story from the floor judge. You want to get the story from the player you're investigating. You want to get any information from his opponent. And if there might be a bystander, not every investigation requires talking with everybody in the room. But try and get their versions of the story. If you can, separate the player and his opponent, get their stories away from the table. Don't let them interrupt. If you have to do it at the table, one at a time, all the way through, then the other person all the way through. and kind of get an impression of everything that you've gathered up there. If something is just struck you as funny, then maybe go back and ask a few more questions of everybody. If you have the luxury of having another judge there, definitely talk with them again. If you're on your own, you're going to do the best decision that you can. And the other thing that you have to consider when you're talking with the player who may be cheating, as Cheaty McCheatypants here, how plausible is a story? Because they're going to build a story. It's subconscious. It's not like they're deliberately setting out to pull the wool over your eyes. They're going to self-justify what happened and come up with something that kind of sort of seems like it makes sense. So step back with your judge common sense, your experience in playing games, your experience in having wacky things happen. How plausible is it that it worked out like that? I have an example that I pulled from real life for me. There's a young player who I got called on like turn 2 of the game, turn 2 or 3, it was really early in the game. And the opponent thought he had an extra card in hand, and we did a card count, and he had an extra card in hand. So at a minimum, we've got drawing extra cards. But drawing extra cards is something that we look at carefully because that's cheating too. If you draw one accidentally and don't say anything, you're hiding it. And his story was, yeah, I have one there. I'm not sure. It must have stuck together. I didn't notice because my hand is all basic lands and this one spell. And I looked at his hand. His hand was all his basic lands and this one spell. There's a reasonable degree of plausibility there that when you get that many cards and you see a spell and everything is land, that you aren't going to count everything else there. It's one card and many lands. If you had 2 or 3 cards in hand, the plausibility just sinks to nil right there. By the time you get into the game where you've only got a small number of cards in hand, an extra one is a big jump. It's really, really hard not to notice it. I talked with him at great length. He was extremely nervous about all this. In the end, I did decide just to do the drawing extra cards for him. He lost that part of the match. He ended up losing the match. He ended up dropping out of the event. I may have let a cheater go that day, but I think I also scared the bejesus out of him. So I think that if he knows that if he draws another card accidentally, he would be better off just calling a judge and getting the straight game loss and not being run through this. So that's something you think about. Could it happen? Has this situation they're talking about ever happened to you? Have you ever heard about it happening? Does it seem like it's reasonably plausible? But in any case, got to make a decision, get the tournament moving on again. Again, you don't have the luxury of spending several hours talking about it. You may miss a DQ that should have been. Maybe I should have DQ'd that young guy that I had. You may DQ somebody and then in retrospect you think, well, maybe I should not have done that. It's not the end of the world. You've got a tournament going, it's got to keep running. One thing I do want to mention, I've seen a couple judges do this. If you start your investigation when there's 5 minutes left on the clock, and your investigation takes 15 minutes, and you give them, and it ends up in a game rule violation, and you need to give them a time extension, give them the 5 minutes that they had from the tournament. Don't give them the full 15 of your investigation. They don't get 10 free minutes. No one else had 10 free minutes.